Now, when Tom Clancy's The Division 1 was winding down and the developers had gone dark and silent after releasing Resistance, which was a special extra mode, I remember there were a lot of conversations in the community and a lot of people said, it would make sense if they actually built upon The Division 1 and continued from there. And then when The Division 2 was revealed, some people still held that notion, and I understand that it's something that's actually quite noble and notable. Welcome to today's video. Welcome to the GamerDad channel. I'm finally getting around to posting on Division content after so many days. And I wanted to talk about the prospects of ending the Division 2 at this point in time, and not necessarily talk about it, but reiterate it, because I've been on this notion for the past few years. This is something that kind of made my channel somewhat infamous because I always touted the notion of a Division 3 being the only way forward. But I wanted to drive, this conversation for us to look back a bit and see why I'm coming up with this particular notion. So looking at Tom Clancy's The Division 1 is probably going to give us a little bit more context. So let's go ahead and see why. Number one, The Division 1 was a very solid game. It was a game that leveraged the use of server and client technology to the best possible way, running AI on the server, just creating the world on the base game, and then having you log in for a lot of your processes to run through servers across Ubisoft and your own PlayStation or Xbox, or maybe even PC network connection. This allowed for the game to be able to run at decent fidelity while you were able to do a whole lot of things that would have limited any other video game had they tried to do it on the PlayStation 4 console and Xbox One at that time. And bringing that full circle, you could see that the PC version actually performed better in terms of frame rates and so on and so forth, but the game still suffered from things like network connectivity and the bugs that plague a complex game of this nature. Now, bringing the game to a place where the developers were able to finally stabilize things over many years, because this basically cost the player base because the game was quite unstable and unfinished at release and was a big, huge downgrade from what was promised. A lot of the hope for the franchise seemed like it was all flimsy. Then you had The Division 2 get revealed after long periods of quiet and silence, and maybe some support here and there from The Division 1 with global events and maybe the new item here and there that they were adding or unveiling in the game. And then we basically got another Division game on the horizon. The Division 2 launched in 2019 right after Anthem, and Anthem was a big disaster, but The Division 2 was able to hold its head up, even though people were, in a sense, somewhat, I would say, very antagonistic against live service games and a lot of those different things because they had been burned. The Division was still able to maintain some of its leverage with its past community and still sell decent numbers for its second iteration. Now, this did not come with its own, flowers all over the place. There were a lot of hassles with the PlayStation 4 console pretty much getting the poorest version of the game. And this was where I started to get the clue that it appears that this game is actually much more ambitious than the hardware that we had in place. So the methodologies of actually developing the game, in my opinion, I think, were probably archaic and would probably not be able to allow for the game to run further much longer. The developers were able to still drop a 1-year DLC and had already decided that they were going to quit making any more content for the Division game. That is the Division 2 anyways. But somewhere along the line, as the game was nearing its third year, we found out that there was going to be more content coming, more events, and a Division Heartland game, which was going to be a free-to-play game, cross-play version available, which is going to be done by another studio. But it did not necessarily resolve the fact that the Division 2 was already at a point, in quote, bloated for the technology, the hardware, and the paradigms that were used to develop the game itself. I strongly believed at that time, because at the cusp of the Division and the Warlords of New York Year 1 DLC, we were looking forward to the PlayStation 5 and Series X. I thought that it was probably necessary that a next generation, in quote, or new generation of Division game be made in the sense of a fully paid game, not necessarily a free-to-play live service game, because those can have their issues, but a fully played game was going to be something that did resonate with the community, but something that ran on these new generation consoles. And I thought that that would probably be the very best way for a game like The Division to go. Now, other games that are live service shooters do a very good job in actually bringing their presentation and not having too many issues at the end of the day. But here's the challenge with a game like Tom Clancy's The Division 2. The Division 2 is a third-person shooter. Third-person games, for the most part, and I don't know what the trend is, seem to have a lot of performance challenges that a lot of FPS games will not necessarily have. And so how the developers at Ubisoft Massive and Ubisoft Bucharest and all the other teams across were able to still squeeze in new content like the countdown mode, the other raids, and so on and so forth into this game after its production and after it was already rumored that there was not going to be any content, to me is a feat of miraculous development. That's what I just basically call it, because I just felt like there was no room. It kind of makes a little bit of sense. So let me give you an example. In learning Unreal Engine 4, I was basically showing somebody something about, their own project. They showed me their project and they said, hey man, I have all this stuff on my world, but I'm loading my project and it's taking me a little bit more time. And I said, well, your computer has to compile all of your shaders and combine all of your elements. Why not remove all your health pickups that you've actually littered around the world and leave only one or two so that you can give your computer room or a little bit of memory to be able to run very well? This concept is somewhat loose in my description, but I think it applies very much generally to any video game. The more you keep adding to a video game without, in quote, sunsetting, like Destiny eventually did, the more complex your game is and the more difficult and challenging it is to run, and it is to keep up with your code and maintenance and so on and so forth. So even though I've not been posting Division content, I've been watching from the sidelines. The amount of bugs that have actually plagued this game are probably at some of the worst levels that I've ever seen. And I'm somebody who's been much more fortunate than many other people who's not really been affected by a lot of bugs in the Division overall in my 6 years experience. But these bugs that I've seen at this past time in the last, say, 2 months have been insane. In fact, some of the top content creators in this community are over there running around playing Modern Warfare, which they usually do. I'm not saying anything about you guys being bad, gentlemen. You don't get me wrong, but it's just interesting that usually, and this is a trend as a PvE player, I see you guys enjoying PvP. But now you guys can't even touch PvP, which is a very sad thing. And this is as a result of the game, its developers probably getting to the point where it's reached its point of development redundancy. So just on the technical side alone, a new game is probably necessary to continue this franchise. Now I get it. I may be jumping the horse. Detective Kamikaze Von Doom might have smelled it and is probably typing his comment, "We need the Division Heartland." I get it. The Division Heartland seems to be like a solid concept. If you were to maybe go back and look towards a lot of what we've seen about the game, you'd probably maybe be able to conclude that the game does seem to have an audience and is trying to bring a wider audience into the Division community or the Division ecosystem as a whole. But nonetheless, a third-person shooter is also a very lucrative and attractive proposition, and this has a bigger potential to draw more people in. In talking about possibilities of maybe the development team working on another Division game, I've actually made extensive videos years ago talking about why I thought they had the resources and were actually putting the resources towards the Division at Ubisoft Massive, because this is their original franchise. This is their original game, and Ubisoft as a company loves its originals. So I don't see them trading the Division for, say, following through with a lot more Star Wars games and a lot more games under Avatar and Disney IPs. I actually do see them following through as well with some of their originals, the Division being their number one. So that alone stands by itself as the highest likely probability that would bring about a Division game. But that's an entire video about economics and finances and profits and economies of scale. So we'll keep this video to the technical side and just basically go ahead with these conclusions that right now the Division 2 is in a blow phase. So if the devs or if the team is not interested in making another Division game, but wanting to build on the framework of the Division 2, how can this be achieved? I think this can be achieved if they don't want to go that route, by actually sunsetting some of the content. That is, actively deleting chunks of this game. Now, that sounds crazy because we paid for this game, and every single area and aspect of this game that actually is loaded in or that actually is, part of the whole ecosystem has had some kind of a bearing to the entire game. Meaning, if say there was a raid that they wanted to sunset, there were probably items that were attached to that raid that you could use in the other game, whereas if they sunset the content, you may not be able to get your hands on it. And the developers have come up with this really hardcore, hardline ideology that you must work very hard and grind to get all your gear. So That's going to be another really challenging part of the entire sunsetting concept if it were ever put into application. And so I think this is probably, from a technical side, where we are in regard to the game, because you could already tell that the first game probably had the same constraints. This is why they started up from ground up with a whole different game, a whole different concept. There was nowhere else to go with the PlayStation 4s and the Xbox versions. Maybe the PC version could have received expansions, but this is the challenge with developing multi-platform, open-ended, live service, multiplayer games. You really have to deal with the expansiveness of the game in some sense. Not saying that this was what every game deals with. Some franchises will continue to milk new and fresh versions of the same game. Call of Duty, I'm talking to you. FIFA, I'm talking to you. But at the end of the day, a game like The Division already is so complex that it is not far to reach that conclusion when you look at things like gameplay loops, loot, gear systems, skills, signature skills, and all of the above that you can throw into the mix. So, their developers and massive Ubisoft, you already know what the pertaining issues are. And I'm sure you already know what it is that you're going to do next. You know your next steps, but you just don't want to tell us or can't tell us because you have your NDAs to honor and NDAs to basically keep. And for those of us who've been in the community long enough, we understand, we get it. We know, we've been here, and we know how it goes. But it'd be nice, though, if y'all could maybe accidentally leak something. You know these accidental, you know what? I'm going to get out of here. I'm probably doing too much. Talk to you guys later. Peace out.